Good afternoon, Luang Paul.
Good afternoon.
Today is Saturday, June the 27th. Thank you for willing to answer our questions again, Luang Paul. First question today is regarding separation from the loved ones. How should we prepare for inevitably separation from the loved one, especially our old-aged parents?
Well, this is life experience. We all have to separate from what we love. And this is oftentimes not recognized. We live in a world of our own thoughts and desires, hoping to find eternal happiness. And never thinking about that the end of life is always the ultimate separation from the loved. Because it is, when you love somebody or when you love life, then you don't want to be separated from it. But in mindfulness practices, we're aware of this feeling, this sense of separation, of division, of longing for someone or not wanting to die. Are mental states that we can be aware of. Like preparing aging people for death, there are many questions many people ask. They have parents or grandparents who are very old and are going to die soon, and how to prepare them. Well, speaking from experience, old people know they're going to die. It's very clear. When you get old, you don't have that much longer to live. But sometimes, to be sensitive to the person involved, whether they're open to discussions about death or not, just to kind of blatantly bring up the subject might be unwanted or a shock, but you can be sensitive to the person involved about death because it is important. It's the ultimate experience of our life, and to see it as not as something unpleasant or unwanted, but a kind of release. As the poet Shelley said, awakening from the dream of life, because life itself is like a dream, and death can be an awakening reality rather than a kind of horrible ending to a life. Now, this is trying to put into perspective just the natural processes that every human being has to endure in a lifespan, from birth, growing up, getting old, getting sick, separation from the loved, death. These are all, in monastic life, we reflect on these all the time, every day, just to bring into consciousness the realities of our humanity. It's like this. There's nothing wrong with it, and when we think there's something wrong with somebody that dies, is just because we think that death is something bad, but it's not. It's a release from the conditions of the physical form, and see it as rest rather than as some kind of unknown fear, something that one can only be afraid of and create into the possibilities after death. What happens when somebody dies? But the Buddha pointed to the reality of the deathless, which is the conscious reality that we're all experiencing in this very moment. A consciousness isn't born and doesn't die, where what dies is the physical body, and what is constantly dying in our everyday experience are our thoughts, memories, emotions, arise and cease according to conditions. They are born, they die, they begin, they end. And the physical body was born and will die. That's what it's supposed to do. So, to see death as something kind of like the ultimate achievement of life is awakening to the kind of rest that one can expect from the reality of death, physical death.
And should we prepare ourselves for the death of our parents the same way?
Yes, because that's what everybody has to learn from. When one's parents grow old, get sick, and die, and we do feel grief, and we don't want them to die, or we miss them. Things like mental states arise, but the mindfulness and wisdom practice is to be aware of what you're feeling. If I say you shouldn't grieve, if you're really mindful you won't grieve, then you'll feel guilty about grieving. But what I encourage you to do is when a parent dies or somebody you love passes on, to be aware of the sense of loss. That which is aware of grief isn't grieving, and that's what mindfulness really is. It's the awareness, it's the knowing. It's like this, where we do form opinions about if you're really mindful, you don't feel anything, but we can't help but feel. This is a feeling realm, this realm of our human state, the physical body. We have eyes, ears, nose, tongue. We have retentive memory. We have emotions of pleasant, painful, happy, unhappy conditions that arise according to other conditions. But what doesn't change according to conditions, what is our real refuge, is in the Dhamma, which is, in practical terms, consciousness here and now. Because experience is always here and now. We believe in the reality of time as our real world. But time is, when you investigate time, tomorrow is what you don't know. Yesterday is a memory. But there's a knowing, always in the present. And when we don't take refuge in knowing, in mindfulness, then we tend to get caught in our emotions. We grasp hold of them and we become miserable and unhappy and carried away by our grief that we are naturally feeling. But with awareness, we're aware of grief or sense of loss is like this. It is what it is in the present. It's conditioned. It's a phenomenon that is, and it's changing. It doesn't have any permanent ability at all. So this way of reflecting, which is the cultivation of awareness in daily life, helps us to deal with the problems that we do face in life, such as the aging of our parents, their sicknesses, their problems, and their final death is part of a life experience, not something that is bad, but just the way things are, that all that is born will die.
If we feel anxious thinking about our parents that will pass away or in the future, so we should be mindful of the anxiety that we feel too, right?
Yes. Because that's what you know. If you feel anxious about your parents' condition as they grow old, you're aware of anxiety. Well, and that awareness of anxiety is not grasping it. It's just knowing it's like this. Where when we grasp anxiety, then we become an anxious person. So you can't help but feel anxious when you think of your parents, with their physical problems, their aging difficulties, and their eventual dying. Those very thoughts create a sense of anxiety and fear because the future is the unknown. What happens when you die? All these speculations, thoughts about the future, images that we create, or denials that we grasp are, created by us. They're artificial conditions that we tend to grasp blindly and lose awareness of them because we're believing totally in that we are or I am this anxious person, and that I may not want to be an anxious person. So how do I get rid of anxiety? And so it becomes complicated. The more you claim it and see it as personal, as some kind of problem that you want to get rid of, it becomes more complicated, more convoluted, until you trust your awareness to be aware, because you're always aware. You're never not aware, but whether you're aware with wisdom or with ignorance. So attaching to the anxiety out of ignorance is suffering, and letting go of anxiety and being aware of the feeling of anxiety, letting go of it, is wisdom, is liberation from suffering.
Thank you very much, Ajahn. Second question is regarding practicing loving kindness. So we should practice loving kindness towards oneself and to others, and not harming oneself and to others. The practicing loving kindness and not harming others are easy to understand. Can you explain how we can cultivate loving kindness to ourselves, to oneself, and not harming oneself?
Well, as I was saying before, loving kindness is ultimately awareness. If you can create the words loving kindness, they're sankharas, and then you spread loving kindness to yourself. So that's the intellectual process. But the realities of loving kindness, of metta, is awareness. Being aware of what you're feeling, being aware of the body, being aware of the thinking habits you have, your emotions, and so forth, is actually loving kindness, because it's non-critical. Awareness doesn't criticize. It's not condemning, judging, making any comments about whether it's right or wrong, good or bad. It's like we use the phrase, it's like this. So loving kindness and awareness are almost synonymous, or can be completely synonymous, when we see that by accepting the way we feel, not by letting go of it and recognizing it's like this, meaning we're not trying to do anything with it, criticize it, saying we should or shouldn't feel this way, but we are accepting it as it is. And of course it changes. What begins must end, and mental states are, very impermanent. They change, quite regularly throughout the day and night.
So, and that's how do we put that towards ourselves with that critical thinking mind that criticize ourselves all the time or put ourselves to do?
Well, it's a habit that the thinking process is a critical. That's what it does. It criticizes. So you've got heaven and hell, good and bad, right and wrong, true and false, and then we when we look at life, what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, what we think, we evaluate it as good or bad, right or wrong, pleasant or unpleasant, acceptable or unacceptable, and so the tendency to criticize oneself becomes a habit. And the more the more you depend on the thinking process to create the world you live in, then you see everything wrong with the world. The world is, it shouldn't be the way it is. There's so many things: wars, disease, pandemics, political problems, social problems, relationship problems. There's nothing but problems and difficulties when we look at the world through the critical mind, because we conceive perfection, like a perfect relationship, a perfect society, a perfect man, a perfect woman, and then, but the thinking process is aware, tends to dwell on what's wrong with somebody, what's wrong with the political system, what's wrong with the society, what's wrong with the relationship. And therefore, we become obsessed. We see ourselves, as we have ideals of perfection of what one personally would like to be, and then you look at yourself, your critical mind will say, you shouldn't feel like this, you shouldn't be afraid, you should be brave, you should love people, you shouldn't be critical of them, you shouldn't hate, you shouldn't get angry, you shouldn't be greedy, you should, everything's equal and everybody's the same, and we can see things in terms of ideals. And the thinking mind can create ideals of perfection. Just take words to their superlative form, and the very best of everything. You can create an image of perfection. And then what we are experiencing through the changing conditions that we're living with, such as the physical body and the changing conditions of experience of what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, these things can't be perfect. Their very nature is to change from beginning to end. So best you can expect from sankharas, from conditions, from phenomena, is occasional peak moments when something that is at its best, but it can't stay there because its nature is to change. Every like inhalation, exhalation, you can't just inhale. You reach a peak where you can't inhale anymore, and that conditions the exhaling. So sankharas are based on that pattern of arising and ceasing. And well, as human beings, because we have this reflective ability, this ability to intuit reality in the present moment, we're observing this as we experience it. And that which is aware of change doesn't change. So that's when we take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. Are they, the words themselves are sankharas, but are they pointing to awareness, mindfulness, amatta Dhamma, the reality of the deathless reality that we are, rather than what we think we are? So people, perfectionists can always find fault. You can always feel guilty about the mistakes you made in life. You can always see things, in yourself that could be improved or shouldn't be, or become obsessive and unpleasant. You'd like to get rid of them. But just by trying to perfect yourself as a personality, as a sankhara, it's impossible. You can make things better, is the most you can do. But to really understand life and existence, it takes awareness, this reflective Buddha mind, Buddha nature that the Buddha pointed to and encouraged us to trust, to take refuge in. So that is, the way out of suffering. Even though an enlightened human being still gets old, gets sick, and dies, they don't escape the realities of the sankharas, but their relationship to sankhara is knowing rather than grasping, ignorant grasping of sankharas, trying to control, trying to annihilate, trying to change, trying to get what you want all the time, or believing in everything you're thinking and feeling as reality, where if you trust your awareness, even if you're depressed, you can be aware. Depression, feeling down, life is meaningless, is like this. And as you trust this awareness, then that never gets depressed, it never gets angry, it never gets greedy. It's perfect. It's perfection itself. So we call that the amatta Dhamma. So this is the way out of suffering, by understanding it, not by destroying suffering, but not grasping it. Because, if we don't want to grow old, we're going to be terribly upset when we find out how old we are. If we don't ever want to get sick, we just want to be healthy and vigorous forever, we're going to be terribly disappointed, because that's you're asking for something that's impossible. But what isn't impossible is awareness every moment, here and now. It's available every moment. It's not something refined and that you have to aspire to through years of diligent meditation practice, but it's something to begin to awaken to, like the word Buddha means awakened consciousness, awaken to reality. And this is very clearly pointed out in the Buddha's teaching, encouraging us to patibhatta, or to practice, put it into daily life practice, use it not just in meditation retreats, but to integrate this awareness into our daily life. This is the gift that is available to us at this time.
Thank you, Paul. Another question is, how is thinking an obstacle to knowing?
Like thinking is an artificial function, and as I've said previously, it's about the nature of sankharas. It's a sankhara itself. Thinking is a sankhara. It's a condition. It's not ultimate reality. So you can't find ultimate reality through thinking, through the intellect. It's an intuitive awakening rather than an intellectual reasoned experience. So when and we're modern life in modern societies. People are educated. This is called the information age. There's so much information easily available to everybody at this time, and creates more thinking. But we're aware of thinking. If you're not a thought, you're not a helpless victim of thoughts if you observe them. And I always encourage people to, because they can understand this, observe thinking, but then they can't do it. So, rather than just holding on to the idea that you should observe what you're thinking, I encourage deliberate thinking, so that you're not interested in the thoughts that you're thinking, but you're aware of thinking, I am a human being, or something innocuous, something you're not interested in, or brings no strong negative feelings or positive feelings. So you're not interested in the words anymore, and you're not, that's such a banal thought as I am a human being, but you're interested in non-thinking, where the thought ceases. So when you think I, it's just one letter word, and it ceases immediately. But excuse me, there's still consciousness after the pronoun I has ceased, and you're aware of that. You're aware of non-thought. And then between the spaces between the words, I and am and a and human being, and the ending of human being, there's nothing, isn't there? The word itself disappears into consciousness, into a void, and there's still awareness. So you're beginning to connect with awareness that isn't conceived or isn't filled with thoughts, with conditions, with feelings. So, because this is so simple, most people overlook this kind of practice. But as you learn to think deliberately, quite intentionally think something, but you're not interested in what you're thinking, but the substratum behind the thought. So the reality of consciousness, a conscious awareness that is always present. When the pronoun I has disappeared, am has disappeared, a has disappeared, human being has disappeared, there's the same knowing awareness that one recognizes. But we tend to not notice it when we're just caught in the thinking process. Because thinking, it depends on grammar, it's a habit pattern. When you're born, you're not born thinking. No newborn baby is thinking, doesn't have a language yet, doesn't know how to think, but is certainly aware. A newborn child knows when it's hungry, when it's tired, when it's needy, so it has, the instinctual intelligence for survival and expressing its needs without thought. It doesn't think I'm hungry, I'm tired, but it's aware that hunger is, that when hunger comes, then, it demands food. And as adults, where we're caught in our thinking process, we think we're hungry. We might feel hunger, and then we identify with the hunger as I'm hungry. And that's a thought, I am the hunger that I'm feeling. Where in awareness, hunger is like this, so you're looking at it not as giving it a personal quality, but seeing it as impersonal. It is what it is. So when the body's hungry, it's like this. And your relationship to the experiences of fatigue, of hunger, of boredom, of fear and anxiety, are beginning to, you're seeing through them. You're not trying to destroy them or annihilate them, but you're no longer kind of deluded by them. So I encourage people to not believe their thoughts, because ultimately, if the here and now is perfect. Paccuppanna Dhamma, here and now, the deathless reality of here and now, timelessness. So perfection is here and now, where when we forget that, when we get caught in memories of the past or images of the future, we forget perfection. We become lost in our own fears and desires, our own habits, our own emotional habits, thinking habits, our concepts, our views, our opinions. And then we get lost in we can spend much of our life caught in anxiety about the future or guilt or regret about the past, when every moment of every human being's life is perfect in itself. So so try to imagine that. You can't images, there's no image for that. It's an intuitive awakening reality that we encourage you to experiment, to try it out, to begin to not believe everything your critical mind says about what you should or shouldn't be, or how life should be or shouldn't be, or carrying grudges, carrying resentments about things done in the past is suffering in the present. So you're thinking about some unfair experience, some unwanted abuse you've experienced in the past, in the present. So you're not aware of the perfection of here and now. Completely oblivious to it, even though it is here and now. So so bhavana, or meditation, in this sense, is learning to no longer grasp imagination, grasp memory out of ignorance, but to reflect that they arise and cease, they come and go. So we're not trying to get rid of them, but we're no longer enslaved or deluded by them, by memories of the past or our hopes or fears for the future.
Thank you very much, Ajahn.